does the president have the constitutional authority to deploy federal troops, specifically like the Marines, into a state without the governor's consent, and particularly in the context of immigration protests?
Thank you for having me, Salma. Well, it is established legally in the United States, according to various federal legislations, that the U.S. president does have the authority or the jurisdiction to deploy federal troops to cities or states in times of certain types of emergency, either upon the request of the state government or bypassing the state government in certain cases as allowed by the Insurrection Act. The thing is that the established fact is that, or the established legal doctrine in the United States is that the United States military, the armed forces, cannot act as a police force or as a law enforcement agency. And this is only allowed under the 1807 Insurrection Act, which has not been invoked so far. The president does have the authority to federalize the National Guard and deploy it in states of emergency, maybe even without sometimes the consent of the local governor. However, what President Trump did is that he federalized 2,000 troops of the California National Guard, and he also deployed about 700 U.S. Marines from the regular military to California, according to Title 10 of the Federal Code. And Title 10 allows the president to use these troops to act as a supporting force to the law enforcement, state law enforcement and city law enforcement agencies like the LAPD in this case, for example. However, they have no jurisdiction to arrest people and submit them to any legal prosecution or accountability. So now there is some sort of legal fluidity. There is a back and forth between the president and the governor of California, Mr. Newsom, who disputes the president's claims and has vowed to take it to court.
Now, assessing Trump's defense, what legal precedent or federal statutes govern the use of National Guard troops versus active duty military in response to domestic unrest?
The two most established laws, as far as I know, is Title 10 of the Federal Code and also the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act is only applied in cases where the United States is facing any form of unrest or civil war that necessitates the intervention of the armed forces. And of course, these are under very exceptional circumstances that the president can invoke such a law, which did not happen, by the way. However, we do have many previous instances where the 1807 Insurrection Act was enacted by various presidents, including President Eisenhower, President Kennedy, and other leaders as well, during the race riots in Detroit, for example, when the military was deployed in order to restore order and quell the riots. So there are precedents where the Insurrection Act was invoked, at least in the 20th century. However, it was never invoked in any recent history, because the Insurrection Act allows the U.S. president to bypass state authorities and act as a federal agent in any of these states, which is, of course, contravenes the U.S. Constitution in essence. However, this is the exception that is created by the 1807 Insurrection Act. However, what has been invoked right now is Title 10 of the Federal Code, which means that now he sends these troops to support the state government, which disputes his own claims and says that we do not need the National Guard, we do not need the military, and that the police can control these protests and these riots and acts of vandalism without the intervention of the military. So it seems that now we are on the verge of some sort of constitutional crisis in the United States now, with the state government of California accusing the president of the United States of violating these state jurisdiction per the Constitution.
Now, sir, I have to ask you about your expectations. Could Governor Newsom's lawsuits successfully block the deployment? And also, on what constitutional or legal grounds might it stand?
I think that I'm not a legal expert. However, the governor and the president are both politicizing this matter to the most. Governor Newsom is denying facts on the ground, denying that riots are taking place and that the police is so far unable to control the situation on the ground. And on the other hand, President Trump is taking advantage of this situation in order to further his anti-immigration policy and his deportation policies and expand the operating space of ICE in order to carry out more mass deportations, especially from so-called sanctuary cities and blue states that are much more lenient towards illegal immigrants than Republican-dominated states, for example. And of course, California shares a border with Mexico. It has millions of illegal immigrants, and it is a prime target for ICE and the current administration for the mass deportations of illegal immigrants. However, but even so, the case of Governor Newsom does have some grounds because the president sent these troops without an invitation from the state governor, and he did not invoke the Insurrection Act, which allows him to bypass the authority of the governor in this case. So maybe the court will rule in his favor, but of course we will have to wait and see what will happen in this regard.
But sir, what do you make of Trump's warning that he could deploy more troops if needed, and the impact of this statement on his case in the lawsuits?
I think that Trump is inflaming the situation further with his rhetoric, even though deploying troops might seem necessary at this point in order to restore order and control the situation. Yet the rhetoric he is adopting, whether through his televised statements or his posts on social media, are only inflaming the situation further. He is describing the rioters and the protesters basically as enemies of the state, as enemies of America. He's demonizing them, admonishing them, and he's also placing the Democrats and the state government of California within the same bracket or premise with those rioters. So he's politicizing the matter in order to portray himself as a champion of law and order, and the opposition, the Democrats, as supporters of anarchy and other forms of unlawful behavior. And of course, this will solidify the support for Trump among his power base, which is very pro-deportation, yes, which is very anti-immigration as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much from Cairo. That was the International Relations Specialist, Dr. Mohamed Osman. Thank you so much for joining us here on QNews. And now